There is a thread in the blood of the Mexican people that leads to the other side of the world, not to Spain, not to the Aztecs, to the far shore of the Pacific Ocean, 10,000 miles away, a place no history of Mexico ever told you to look. For as long as the story has been told, it has been told the same way. A Spanish conqueror steps onto a beach in 1519. Behind him, an empire of gold and obsidian. In front of him, Moctezuma and the great city on the lake. Two worlds collide, Europe and the Aztec, and out of that collision, over 5 centuries, comes a new people, the mestizo, the mixed one, the Mexican. 2 ingredients, 1 nation. A story so clean it fits on a single page of a textbook. And then geneticists did something that had never been possible before. They took that story, the whole confident 500-year-old story, and they read it against the actual sequence written in the blood. And the sequence did not say 2, it did not say Spain and the Aztecs. It said something so strange that the scientists checked it, and checked it again before they let themselves believe it. Because inside Mexican DNA they found a strand that by every map of history should not be there at all. A lineage that did not come across the Atlantic. A lineage that did not rise from the ancient valleys of Mexico. A lineage that came from maritime Asia, from the far side of the largest ocean on Earth, and buried itself so quietly in the ancestry of a Mexican coast that no one knew to look for it until the machines found it. So, here is the question that ought to unsettle you, the way it unsettled the people who first saw it in the data. What is a bloodline from the other side of the Pacific doing in the veins of a people whose entire story is supposed to be Spain and the Aztecs? And if the tidy 2-ingredient tale left that out, what else did it leave out? Keep that thread in your mind, because everything that follows is the slow uncovering of a single secret. And the secret is not where Mexicans came from. The secret is that there is no single where. The tidy story was not just incomplete. It was hiding one of the richest records of the human journey found anywhere on the planet. Every nation needs an origin, and Mexico's is one of the most powerful ever written. It begins with a conquest and a woman. Hernán Cortés, the Spanish captain, and La Malinche, the Nahua woman who translated for him and whose child by him is remembered rightly or wrongly as one of the first mestizos, the first of the mixed. From that meeting, the national myth grows, the Spanish father, the indigenous mother, and the blending of the two into a single new race. 4 centuries later, that blending was given a name and a philosophy. After the Mexican Revolution, a thinker named José Vasconcelos called the mixed people of Latin America La Raza Cósmica, the cosmic race, a fusion of the world's bloodlines into something new and whole. It was meant as pride, as unity, as a way of turning a painful history into a shared future. And it worked. It became the story a whole nation told about itself. To be Mexican was to be the child of 2 worlds, Europe and the Aztec, fused into one. It is a beautiful story. It is also, as an account of what is actually written in Mexican DNA, almost completely inadequate. Not wrong exactly, just far, far too small. Because the moment the genome was read, 2 worlds turned out to be a number off by more than an order of magnitude. To see how the scientists had to do something no historian and no storyteller had ever been able to do. They had to stop reading Mexico as a story, as conquistadors and empires and dates, and read it instead as a sequence. 3 billion letters of code drawn from the living people of Mexico and then compared letter by letter against the DNA of populations all over the world. The landmark came in 2014. A large international team, led in part by the geneticist Andres Moreno Estrada, carried out the most detailed genetic survey of Mexico ever attempted. They sampled indigenous communities from across the whole country, from the deserts of the north to the forests of the Yucatan, and they sampled the cosmopolitan mestizo population, the ordinary Mexicans of the great cities, the people the national story calls the children of 2 worlds. And they read all of it and laid it side by side. The first surprise was not about the Spanish half of the story. It was about the indigenous half. Because when the team looked at the Native American ancestry inside Mexico, they did not find one people. They found a hidden world. We have to slow down here because this is the first crack in the tidy story, and it is a deep one. When the national myth says indigenous, it tends to mean one thing: the Aztecs. The Empire Cortez conquered the city on the lake, the feathered headdresses in the museum. One grand indigenous people absorbed into the mix, but the DNA of indigenous Mexico is not one people. It is dozens, and they are not close cousins with slightly different customs. They are genetically as far apart from one another as entire continents. The 2014 study measured it directly, and the result is almost hard to believe. Two indigenous groups inside Mexico, the Seri of the northern Sonoran Desert and the Lacandon Maya of the southern rainforest, differ from each other genetically by about as much as a European differs from an East Asian. Sit with that. Within the borders of one country, two native peoples can be as distinct in their DNA as a Spaniard is from a Chinese. The indigenous ancestry of Mexico is not a single ingredient. It is a whole continent of nations: Nahua, Maya, Zapotec, Mixtec, Purepecha, Seri, Huichol, Totonac, and many more, each with its own deep and separate history, some of them isolated from one another for thousands of years. And here is the part that reaches out of the ancient past and touches the living. That deep indigenous substructure did not vanish when the mixing began. It is still there inside modern mestizo Mexicans, written into the DNA of people in Mexico City and Guadalajara who may have no idea which native nations their ancestors came from. The team could see it in the genomes of ordinary city dwellers: the ghost of a Maya grandparent, a Nahua great-grandmother, a Seri line from the desert layered inside a single person. It was not only visible, it mattered. The same study found that this indigenous substructure was strong enough to affect the body itself, that which native ancestry a Mexican carried subtly shaped measurable traits, including the functioning of the lungs. The difference between one indigenous lineage and another was large enough that a doctor reading a lung capacity test could be misled if they treated Mexican as a single genetic category. The old story said one people. The blood said the indigenous half alone was a mosaic deep enough to change medicine. So already the two-ingredient tale is falling apart on the indigenous side. Now, watch what happens on the other side, the side the story called simply Spanish, because the European strand in Mexican DNA is not simply Spanish either. And what is hidden inside it is one of the quietest, strangest secrets in the whole genome. When geneticists looked closely at the European ancestry across Latin America in a major 2018 study of thousands of people, led in part by the researcher Juan Camilo Chacón Duque, they found threaded through it something the conquistador story never mentions: Sephardic ancestry. The genetic signature of the Jews of medieval Spain and Portugal, a people who in 1492, the very year Columbus sailed, were given a brutal choice by the Spanish crown: convert to Christianity or leave. Many converted, at least in name. They were called conversos. And some of them, carrying a faith they could no longer practice openly and a lineage they could not speak of, did something the crown did not expect. They boarded ships for the New World, for New Spain, to get as far from the Inquisition as the known world allowed. They came to Mexico. They settled, some of them, in the far north, around what would become Monterrey and the kingdom of Nuevo León, a frontier so distant that a hidden family might, for a few generations, breathe. Their descendants married and mixed and forgot, or were made to forget. The practices faded into strange, half-remembered family customs: a candle lit on a Friday evening for reasons no one could quite explain, a reluctance to eat certain foods, a grandmother who swept toward the middle of the room. And the lineage itself went underground into the blood, silent for 400 years, until a genome sequencer reading Mexican DNA in the 21st century brought it back into the light. There are Mexican families today discovering from a saliva test that a thread of their ancestry runs back to a people who crossed an ocean to hide. That is two hidden strands. The tidy story missed a continent of native nations and a buried Sephardic line. There is a third, and this one the story did not miss by accident. It was erased. Ask most people what the roots of Mexico are, and they will say two, Spanish and Indigenous. But there is a third root, la tercera, raíz, and it came in chains. In the 16th and 17th centuries, New Spain held one of the largest populations of enslaved Africans anywhere in the Americas. Long before the plantations of the American South, hundreds of thousands of African men and women were brought across the Atlantic to colonial Mexico, to the silver mines, the sugar coasts, the cities. For a time, the port of Veracruz was one of the busiest points of arrival for enslaved people in the entire hemisphere. They were there at the founding of the nation in enormous numbers. And then, over the centuries, the national story quietly wrote them out, folded them into the word mestizo, dissolved them into a myth of two ingredients, until most Mexicans grew up believing Africa had no part in who they were. The DNA does not forget what the story tried to erase. African ancestry is present across Mexico, and in some places the Costa Chica of Guerrero and Oaxaca, the old coasts of Veracruz. It is strong and unmistakable in communities that have carried it and known it all along. It is a lineage as old as the country itself, hidden in plain sight, waiting in the blood for someone to finally read it back. And now at last we come back to the thread we started with, the strand that should not be there at all. The one that does not lead across the Atlantic in either direction. The one that leads west across the widest ocean on Earth. For 250 years, from 1565 to 1815, one of the most extraordinary trade routes in human history connected Mexico to Asia. It was called the Manila Galleon. Great Spanish ships crossed the Pacific between Acapulco on Mexico's western coast and Manila in the Philippines, carrying silver west and silk, porcelain and spices east, in a voyage so long and so dangerous that many did not survive it. It is the reason there is a China poblana in Mexican folklore, the reason certain foods and words and fabrics crossed the ocean. But the galleons did not only carry cargo, they carried people. Asians, Filipinos and men and women from across maritime Asia, from the Indies and beyond, brought to New Spain by that trans-Pacific trade, where colonial records lumped them all together under a single word, Los Chinos. They arrived in Acapulco. They settled along the Pacific coast of Mexico. They married and had children, and their descendants blended into the population of the West, and their lineage went quiet, exactly like the others. 400 years later, the genome remembered. When scientists sequenced Mexican DNA, especially along that western coast, in the state of Guerrero where Acapulco sits, they found it a strand of East and Southeast Asian ancestry, small but real, in exactly the place the galleons had docked. Not an error, not contamination. A genuine, measurable thread of the far side of the Pacific, sewn into the blood of the Mexican coast by 2.5 centuries of the greatest ocean crossing of the age. The bloodline that should not exist. Explained, and pointing straight back across the water to Manila. Now hold the whole picture in your head, because this is the secret finally coming into focus. Count them. The indigenous ancestry, not one people but a whole continent of nations, some as different from each other as Europe is from Asia. The Iberian ancestry, and hidden inside it, the Sephardic line that crossed an ocean to disappear. The African ancestry, the third root, hundreds of thousands strong, erased from the story but never from the blood. And the trans-Pacific Asian ancestry, a lineage from the far side of the largest ocean on Earth, delivered by the Manila galleons to a single stretch of coast. Indigenous, European, Sephardic, North African, Sub-Saharan African, Maritime Asian, braided together in proportions that shift from one Mexican village to the next inside a single people. This is why the two-ingredient story was never big enough. Mexico is not the meeting of two worlds. It is the meeting of nearly all of them. It sits at a hinge point of human history, the one place where the native civilizations of the Americas, the empires of Europe, the peoples of Africa, and the traders of Asia were all poured into the same crucible over the same few centuries and told to become one nation. Mexican DNA is not a blend. It is an archive, a manuscript of 500 years of the entire planet's movements written in a single body. And the word that tried to hold all of that, mestizo, the mixed one, turns out to be almost heartbreakingly small for what it was describing. It was never two things becoming one. It was the whole world becoming one and then being handed a single word and told that was all it was. There is one more thing the genome is telling us, quieter than the rest, but harder to shape. For most of the history of genetics, the great reference libraries of human DNA, the databases that medicine is built on, that tell a doctor what is normal and what is a warning sign, were built almost entirely from people of European descent. Populations like Mexico's, with their deep and tangled ancestry, were left out. And that turns out to be dangerous. Because a genetic result that means one thing in a European genome can mean something completely different against the backdrop of indigenous American or African or Asian ancestry. When you read a Mexican genome with only a European ruler, you misread it. The 2014 study showed this in the lungs. It is true across medicine. The tidy story did not just flatten Mexico's history. It threatened to flatten Mexico's healthcare until scientists finally understood that a genome this rich cannot be read as a simplified version of someone else's. So look one more time at the ordinary face of a Mexican in a village in Guerrero, a market in Oaxaca, a street in Monterrey, a neighborhood in Los Angeles or Chicago. The national story spent a century telling that face it was the simple sum of two things, a Spanish father and an Aztec mother, the cosmic race, the mixed one. The blood tells a larger and stranger truth. In that single person may run the lineage of a Maya kingdom and a Zapotec one, a Spanish soldier and a Sephardic family that fled the Inquisition, an African brought in chains to Veracruz, and a traveler from the far side of the Pacific who stepped off a galleon in Acapulco 400 years ago. We spent 500 years telling the story of Mexico as a collision between two worlds. The DNA has turned that story inside out. It was never two worlds. It was almost all of them braided into one people and then handed a single small word to carry a history that spans the entire planet. It was written all along in the blood. We only just learned how to read it.